November the 11th in the UK is known as Armistice Day. And on Armistice Day, people across the UK wear poppies on their lapels. And the poppies are sold by the British Legion to raise money to take care of war veterans. And poppies are chosen specifically as the symbol of Armistice Day because of the poem in Flanders Fields, which describes during the First World War, or after the First World War, how poppies grew in the fields in Flanders, in places where all these young souls lost their lives. 100 years on or more, we can be quite removed from the First World War. And many of us don't know individuals who were veterans. In fact, in the Amswych family, even though I'm a rabbi and couldn't be further from a soldier, we actually had veterans in our family. This is why I'm in charge of the family's war medals. These belonged to my great-grandfather, Ivor, after whom I take my middle name. He was enlisted, in fact, at the outbreak of the Great War, as it was called, while his son, my grandfather Basil, was only 6 months old. But nevertheless, the journey that he took was one to protect his family. And it took him to France, to the Ypres salient, and then back to France. An interesting newspaper article describes a time when one day, while resting behind the line, he was confronted by a brawny major, complete with Scottish kilt. And it was his brother, the colourful Major Lionel Asquith. And these fighting sons of Rabbi Amswych, one from Canada and the other from England, were both together battling in France for the country of their birth. As the good son of a rabbi, Major Amswych also organised the Yom Kippur service for all the Jews in the vicinity. And the story reads that white, brown and yellow Jews, Englishmen and Egyptians were discovered, and the YMCA hut that was kindly loaned to them for the service soon rang with chanting prayers. To cap it all, 13 German prisoners, complete with escort, marched in for a Yom Kippur service. And that story of Major Amswych, or Amswych as he became, that story gets no less remarkable. The 6-month-old son helped make history when he served in the Second World War, because he and his father, still serving, were the first Jewish father and son to fight for the British Army to land on the continent. So Major Ivor Amswych, my great-grandfather, was then sent to the Middle East and to Africa, where he was apparently rather embarrassed to be entertained regally by a local chieftain who sat him for 2 days in a chair while local natives showered him with praise. Apparently, he had never been in a more delicate situation than when he was being blessed by the priests of a local godhead. While Basil, my grandfather, went on to become captain instructor of tactics at Sandhurst, Major Ivor Amswych was mentioned in dispatches for gallant and distinguished services in the Middle East, and he also gained the Africa Star, which is this star right here. The final interesting element to our war narrative involved the highest brass coming to speak to my great-grandmother Sissy, Ivor's wife. Knowing that she could be trusted to keep stum because of the good military reputation of the family, she was asked to fake a letter to a fiancé. What she didn't know at the time was that this letter was then placed in the pocket of one poor soldier who had been killed in battle. And my research suggested, before a movie came out about it recently, my research suggested this was a man given the name Major William Martin, whose dead body was washed up on the beaches in Spain. And you may know where this story is headed. Major Martin had a briefcase chained to him, and it contained important secret military documents detailing a forthcoming invasion of Sardinia, Corsica and Greece. And the English demanded them back, but not before the German intelligence in Spain had secretly read them all. Suspecting a ruse, though, they rummaged through the man's clothing, and finding theatre ticket stubs, a hotel bill, and a letter from his fiancée, became convinced that they had stumbled across a real man and real plans for an invasion. So Hitler moved his forces accordingly, and shortly afterwards the Allies launched the real offensive and quickly took over Sicily, since the Axis forces were no longer there. So the Allies were involved in a lot of letter-writing trickery, so I can't be sure it was this attack, but the mention of a fiancé's letter does strongly suggest that this was the story being told in our family history. And I share these stories with you today on Veterans Day, on Armistice Day, because I think it's really important for us to remember. As that poem says, we will remember them, that poem that we will be reciting in this evening's service. We will remember them. We remember their sacrifice. We remember their extraordinary stories. We remember what they offered to give up in defense of our safety, security, our liberty. They offered to give up their lives for us. And so this Shabbat, I encourage you to join us, especially as we say Kaddish this evening in our service, to remember all those who died in defense of our freedom. And I encourage you also to find those who are still alive, to find those who can still tell stories of being a veteran, and to thank them for their service, and to learn their extraordinary story as well. I hope to see you this evening for our Kabbalat Shabbat service, and I wish you Shabbat Shalom.